Welcome to Go with the Code. Now that we have created the new database, next we create, read, update and delete data from the database. But before we begin, there are a few things you should know. In this video, you will learn how to create, read, update and delete data from the database, how to join tables and how to use some common transact SQL functions. But as always, you should know what you do before you do it, because you do it at your own risk. In this video, we will use the database model that we created in the previous video. MS SQL Server supports a wide range of operators that are frequently used in SQL statements. Usually, SQL Server has the best computing power. MS SQL Server also supports a wide range of aggregate functions. Aggregate functions are often used with the group by clause of the select statement. All other aggregate functions except count ignore null value. We will talk about null values later in this video. Always use parameterized SQL statements to avoid SQL injections. Use where clause when you update or delete data from the database. Otherwise, you might delete or update all rows from the table. We will talk about transactions later in this video. When you create an application, you have to use parameterized SQL statements to minimize the risk of SQL injections. Always use sp execute SQL in a production environment. You should also sanitize the user input in your application. .NET offers classes that you should use when you execute SQL statements in your application. Don't use dynamic table or column names in your application. Use insert into command to create new rows into the database table. First, declare variables, type insert into and give the name of the table where you want to create new rows. Next, specify table column names and values. Column names are not mandatory, but to keep things simple, you should specify them. You can also use select statement to insert new rows into the table from an existing table. Pet type table has a surrogate key as a primary key. Primary key column name is ID. If you want to insert a new row into the database with specific ID value and identity specification is on, you can use set identity insert command. In this example, we insert a new row into the pet type table. Row ID value is 1 and the pet type is dog. Use select statement to read data from the database. In this example, we return person's first name and person's last name from the person table where person ID is 1. If you don't use where clause, the query returns all persons from the table. Usually, you read rows and columns from multiple tables. This is when you need join clause. Joins are usually made between primary and foreign key columns. You can also join on multiple columns using AND or operators. In this video, we will use inner, left, right, full and not so often used cross join. You don't have to use inner or outer keyword when you make a join in your statement. Inner, left, right and full join have similar syntax. You can use cross apply and outer apply to join a table valid function. See more from the Microsoft website. Maybe the most common join type is inner join. Inner join returns all rows that have matching values in both tables. Join contains own keyword followed by the table name and a column name. The column value must be the same in both tables. In this example, the select statement returns all persons who have pets and all pets who have at least one owner in a database. If a person has 2 pets, a person is returned twice. Left join returns all rows from the leftmost table, which is, in this case, a person table, and all matching rows from other tables. If a person has a pet, pet name is not null. If a person does not have a pet, pet name is null. The query might return null value when you use outer joins. Right join is similar to left join. The main difference is that right join returns all rows from the rightmost table, which is, in this case, a pet table. Right join returns all matching rows from other tables. If a pet has an owner, person first name and person last name is not null. If a pet does not have an owner, person first name and person last name is null. If a pet has 2 owners, the pet is returned twice. Full join instead returns all rows from the left and from the right table. Null values depends on if a person has a pet or a pet has an owner. If a person does not have a pet, is pet name null. If a pet does not have an owner, is person first name and person last name null. Cross join is not so often used. Cross join returns the combination of tables and table rows. Total number of rows is the number of rows in the first table multiplied by the number of rows in the second table. The following query returns the combination of persons and pets. Alias is a temporary name for the table name or column name within the query. Aliases are useful when you have complex table or column names in your database statement. Alias is usually used with case statement, isNull function, and aggregate functions in a select statement. You should also use alias when you combine columns together. Use cast or convert function if you combine different data types together. There comes times when you need to return data from the database in a specific order. That is when you use order by clause. You can use order by with many data types. Data is sorted in ascending order by default. Null is same as nothing. Nothing plus something is always nothing. If you want to return rows where column value is null or compare expressions to null value, use isNull condition. Opposite to isNull is isNot null. Not operator is a negate to the condition. Not operator is widely used in SQL statements. Not operator may impact to your query performance. In this example, the select statement returns rows where a where classes column has a value. You can use isNull function to handle null values in your query. You can replace null with the given value using isNull function. You can use isNull function with many data types. Len function makes always automatic trim. If you use len function with null value, the result is null. If a column data type is string, can column value also be empty. You can use len function to find rows that have empty value in a column. When column value is empty, is data length 0. Select into is a useful command when you want to back up an existing table. Let's say that you want to manually update or delete data from the database. It would be wise at least copy data into the new table before the operation. You should also have the latest backup files ready. Exists is used when you want to make a subquery that checks the existence of rows. Exists does not duplicate rows. Exists returns true if subquery returns row. Not exists is opposite to exists. Not operators may impact to your query performance. The query return persons who have pets but do not have parents in a database. In operator is similar as exists. The subquery has to return values from one column. Make sure that your subquery does not return null values. Sometimes exists is faster than in. You should use display estimated execution plan to compare in and exists operators' performance. Not in is opposite to in operator. You can use nothing command to check that the expression is not true. With statement defines a common table expression. It does not create a temporary table. It is best for a single query. You can use it with insert, select, update or delete statement. You can use distinct clause to return only distinct values from the database. Distinct does not return duplicate rows. It is commonly used, but it has its performance issues. Order by items must appear in the select list if select distinct is specified. Group by clause is usually used with aggregate functions. You can also get distinct values from the database using group by clause. Group by is used in a select statement. You can also use having clause when you use group by statement. In this example, we are using having clause to return only those persons who have more than one pet in a database. You can also use group by clause inside subquery. The following query returns how many pets a person has. If a person does not have any pets, pets count is in this statement 0. Like is used when you want to search a specific string or character value from your table columns. Like is often used with the percent wildcard. Be careful when you use like clause. It may influence to your query performance. Union and union all combines the results of two or more statements. The difference between union and union all is that union excludes duplicate rows. All queries combined using a union operator must have an equal number of expressions in their target lists, and also data types must be compatible. Use update command to update existing rows from the table. Remember to use where clause so that you don't update all rows from the table. You can use joins, aliases, and operators with update command. Use delete clause to delete existing rows from the table. You should also use where clause with delete command. In this example, we use not exists to make sure that the person does not have parents and pets in a database before we delete the person from the table. Use foreign keys to ensure database integrity. You can also use joins, aliases, and operators in a delete statement. Transactions are useful when you update or delete data from the database. Transactions have different kinds of logs. Always roll back or commit the transaction. Use select statement inside the transaction to make sure that everything went as expected before you commit the transaction. Remember to commit or roll back the transaction so that you don't leave the database log on. MS SQL Server offers many ways to improve your query performance. There comes times when you need to rebuild and reorganize your database indexes. You can display estimated execution plan for your query and compare query performance. Keep your database statement simple and avoid executing SQL statement inside loops. Next, we will create, read, update and delete rows from the database using Management Studio. Let's begin. In this video, we will use the same database model that we created in the previous video. The pet table has a foreign key column that links to the biological sex table. The pet table also has a foreign key column that links to the pet type table. The person table instead has a foreign key column that links to the biological sex table. Foreign key columns does not allow null value. That is why we have to first create new rows into the biological sex table and into the pet type table. Right-click the database name and select New Query. First, we will create new rows into the biological sex table. The table has two columns. Column's value cannot be null. Declare variables and write the insert statement. Because the table uses a surrogate key as a primary key and the primary key column identity specification is true, you have to use identity insert to insert a new row with the specific key value. Row name will be male. Execute the query. In the production environment, you should use sp execute SQL statement. Row ID will be 2 and row name will be female. Execute the query and select all rows from the table. And now we have created 2 rows into the table. Next we create new rows into the pet type table. The table has 2 columns. Column's value cannot be null. First declare variables, then write the insert statement. Because the table uses a surrogate key as a primary key and the primary key column identity specification is true, you have to use identity insert when you create a new row with the specific key value into the table. Row ID will be 1 and row type will be dog. Execute the query, and next we will create the new row into the table. Row ID will be 2 and row type will be cat. And execute the query. And finally, select all rows from the table. Now we have created 2 rows into the table. Next, we will create new rows into the person table and into the pet table. The primary key value is automatically generated. And now we can link persons and pets together. James is the owner of Bailey. Mary is the owner of Buddy. And Jennifer is the owner of Bella. We can also link parents and childs together. James is John's father. James is also William's father. Mary instead is John's mother. And Mary is also William's mother. To make things faster, you can right-click the table name and select Script Table As, Insert to, New Query Editor window, and modify the statement. Finally, we have created all the necessary rows into the database. Next, we use inner join to return all parents and childs from the database. Right-click Person table and click Script Table As, select to, New Query Editor window. Write the inner join. Because parents and childs are in the same database table, we have to use alias name in table name. Using schema name and also table name inside brackets is optional. We have to also use alias name in column names. If an alias name contains spaces, we have to write alias name inside brackets. We can also use order by to return rows in the specific order. Now the select statement returns all parents and childs from the database. Next we change inner join to left join. Left join returns all rows from the leftmost table and all matching rows from other tables. If a person has a child in a database, child first name and last name is not null. If a person does not have a child in a database, child first name and child last name is null. We can use where clause to return only those rows where child first name and child last name is not null. Next we change left join to right join. Right join returns all rows from the rightmost table and all matching rows from other tables. If a child does not have a parent in a database, person first name and last name is null. If a child does have a parent in a database, person first name and last name is not null. We can use where clause to return only those rows where person first name and last name is not null. Next we change right join to full join. Full join returns all rows from the leftmost table and all rows from the rightmost table. Next we change full join to cross join. Cross join returns all tables and table rows. It makes the combination of rows. We can use inner join to return only those rows where a person has a child and a pet in a database. We will also return pet's name. If we change person parent and person child from inner join to left join, we can also return those rows where a pet owner does not have a child in a database. We can use where clause to return only those rows where child first name and last name is null. You can use display estimated execution plan to see how MS SQL Server would execute the query. You can also use display estimated execution plan to compare query performance. In this case, inner join would be a bit faster than left join. Only primary key columns has an index. There are only few rows in the database. Next, we will update an existing row from the person table. We will set where classes to true, where person ID is 1. First, take a backup from the table. Then begin the transaction and write the update statement. Remember to use where clause. Then you have to either roll back or commit the transaction. You can use dpcc opentran command to see if you have any open transactions in the database. And execute the statement using transaction. If you do something wrong, you can roll back the transaction. Otherwise, you can commit the transaction. You can use dpcc opentran command to see that you have an open transaction in a database. After you have committed the transaction is closed. Next, we delete an existing row from the person table where row ID is 5. First, take a backup from the person table and make sure that you have the database backup files ready. Then begin the transaction and write the delete statement. If the data is used, you will get the message. Make sure that with check is specified in a foreign key constraint. You can also use joins, operators, the SQL functions when you create, update and delete statements. And finally, roll back or commit the transaction. And make sure that you don't have any open transactions in a database. Execute the query using the transaction. And finally, commit the transaction. And make sure that you don't have any open transactions in a database. And now we are ready. Until we code again. Bye.